I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Damon Brown. He is an entrepreneur and a coach. He's also an author. He is here to talk to us about some fun stuff. Damon, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your path that led you to this place?
Sure. My name is Damon Brown. My background is journalism. Have 2 degrees in journalism, and was a full-time freelance writer, so independent for several years. Lived in Silicon Valley, learned a lot up there. I did a lot of writing and reporting for Playboy and for the New York Post, a lot of those guys, about how technology connects us and how technology can facilitate intimacy. So how we can build connections and relationships with each other through technology. I left there, ended up proposing to my now wife, had a kid about a year later. And then as she was going back to work, I decided to become an entrepreneur. And literally did an entire book about that. But did my first startup while I was the primary caretaker of my first child. He was actually 4 months old. And so you can imagine that adventure. Had my small startup called So Quotable, which allowed you to capture people's quotes. Had a nice little buzz following. I got the attention of the TED conference folks. They invited me to do a TED talk up at their second stage up in Vancouver. Did that talk, loved it. That got the attention of a friend, and they wanted me to join their thing that they were doing, also bootstrapping, called Cuddler, which connected people for hugs, kind of like Tinder, but for hugs. And I studied technology and intimacy. I did several books about it. Again, I write for Playboy. It makes perfect sense. So I became co-founder, was essentially the CMO and COO, daily operations, also guided the culture, both the people that were using it as well as our inner culture with the three of us that were founders. Launched it. It became the #1 app in several countries, including here in America. We had 100,000 users and 10,000 completed cuddles within the first week. And we were on the late night talk shows, crazy. And again, I still have my baby. He had just turned 1. And so managing that while having, at that time, #1 app in several countries, and handling the media for that. By the time the CES show happened, which happens right down the street here, I'm based in Las Vegas. By the time that happened, that week at CES, we were on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, being hailed as creating this cuddle economy, which was crazy. Around the year point, we realized that we were starting to burn ourselves out. We were juggling all this stuff, still bootstrapping. We had 250,000 users. And so it's like, maybe we should pivot into something else. And that was around the time that the acquirers started to come. And so we ended up having several discussions over that following summer. Ended up selling the company right before its first anniversary, right after my son's second birthday. And so that became a column I started writing with Inc. magazine, as well as a best-selling book series called The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, about these non-traditional entrepreneurs, people who don't fit a certain pattern matching, as we said back in Silicon Valley. So I'm obviously African-American. I was older. I was happily married, literally had a house with a white picket fence in the front, taking care of my little baby boy. Did not drop out of an Ivy League school on the East Coast. And yet I got my company acquired and still managed to be really central to my son's life, which is something I'm really proud of and really thankful for. And so now I'm trying to help other people that I call non-traditional entrepreneurs, people who are doing the side hustles, people who are solopreneurs, people who, again, don't pattern match everyone else. And I'm glad I'm able to exemplify that, not only as far as my own personal journey, but with all the research and studies that I've done over the past several years. Because the company actually sold August of September 2015. And since then, I've done several books, have done other TED Talks, and now do a lot of one-on-one coaching. And then my latest book, it's called Bring Your Worth, Level Up Your Creative Power, Value, Power, and Service to the World. And doing a lot of talks related to that. So that's what kind of got me here. Yeah.
That's
Well,
awesome.
that is awesome.
Thank
You
you.
kind of touched on the non-traditional entrepreneur, which is one of the things we wanted to talk a little bit about.
For sure.
Which I think, for me, that your explanation was spot on. But how does the non-traditional entrepreneur then differ from the traditional entrepreneur, and how does your strategy for helping them then differ?
Oh, that's a really good question, Nicolette. So to answer the first part of it, the difference is background, resources, and therefore a viewpoint.
Mhm.
So if I were to narrow it down, it's tough to narrow down, but if I were to narrow it down. So if your background is different, then the needs that you're going to see society needing are just going to be different. For instance, if you see an issue being you having your food delivered, then you're going to create apps and businesses around that. If you see the issue being getting access to food, period, then whatever business you create are going to be different, which is the difference between an Uber Eats and some of the startups that I'm seeing being made by non-traditional entrepreneurs. So your background ends up informing what impact you're trying to make on the world. Number two, your resources impact what kind of entrepreneur you're going to be. And so I bootstrap both of the companies. I do not come from a rich, or as they say now, privileged background. And so I had to get as a solopreneur, and then later on when I joined the two other founders for Cuddler, we had to find really creative ways to build things. There's a venture capitalist named Arlen Hamilton. I met her a few years ago. She's African American. She's in her late 30s. She's a lesbian. There's all these different things that are like very different about her, which is why her and I clicked right away when we met. And one of the things she said is that one of the best ways to stretch your money is to give it to someone who's used to doing a lot with a little. And so she would be more trusting as a VC to give it to a single mom who has a very clear vision about what she's going to do with money, rather than someone who's always had a lot of money, a lot of resources, and might not know how to maximize them.
Right.
And so I always think about that. In fact, I talk about that adage and Bring Your Worth. But I always think about that adage when I heard that from her a couple of years ago, where it's not a matter of saying this person deserves it and this person does not deserve it, but more like if you're saying you're an entrepreneur, that automatically means you're going to be working with limited resources.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was a matter of just having unlimited resources and that would get you to success, then there'll be a lot of millionaires who would be geniuses right now doing amazing things. And so it's just a little bit of a different vibe. And then lastly, that changes your worldview. So as far as your perspective of the world, and again, what needs to be changed. And so with the people that I work with as far as like one-on-one coaching, with people that buy my books, the people that I connect with when I do my public speaking, over the years, I've learned to kind of see that kind of kindred spirit, because it's going to be not that you want to do something cool and you like the idea of being an entrepreneur, but that there's actually an impact that you want to do in the world, and it needs to happen despite not having as many resources or perhaps being underestimated because of your background.
So how does, and I love what you're saying. How does having the limited resources focus you to be much more creative in what you do? Like, what do you see from those sort of entrepreneurs who have limited resources, like pushing creativity and things like that?
Oh man, like it's that could be a whole nother podcast. Yeah, I mean that's why I start to glow when I end up getting a new coaching client, or I connect with people on the road, or someone buys one of my books and then they reach out to me, which happens a lot, which matters a lot to me. One simple idea is to say, if you have unlimited money, then it's easy to say, how's the saying go? If you have a hammer, then you're going to think everything is a nail. Mm-hmm. So if you have unlimited money, then you're going to be like, okay, no one's buying my product, so I better go ahead and do more advertising. No one's interested in the service, so I better hire more people. Well, maybe your product isn't actually where it needs to be, or maybe your service isn't something that people need. But those questions don't get answered unless you push yourself to do that. Having limited resources forces you to do that, because you can't go and say, okay, well, I'm going to buy more Facebook advertising because no one's buying my product. So obviously I need to ramp up the marketing budget. So that's what I'll do. Obviously I need to hire a CMO because the current CMO is not doing it. Well, maybe it's your product itself. So I think it's kind of like a shortcut to answer those tough questions, that having unlimited money, or I don't, my main thing isn't just saying money though. I just say resources.
Yes.
So having unlimited money, having unlimited time, we're all getting older. So having unlimited energy, those certain things, they allow you to kind of circumvent those tough questions and
Mhm.
kick the can down the road, you can waste a ton of money. I can give it a bunch of stories. We see them in the headlines
Yep.
where you can put billions, literally billions of dollars at something and it still doesn't work. But then you have folks like myself or other people that I really look up to who like put in like hundreds or thousands, not that much. And then we're able to make it grow into a different way. Why is that? Well, it's because we had to ask those tough questions earlier and answer them because we didn't have a choice. And so it's a certain amount of your hand being forced when you have limited resources. And I find like a beauty in that.
Mhm.
So I think that also speaks to another thing we wanted to touch on was kind of like that spirit of the side hustler, right? And I think that creativity kind of falls into there and the limited
Yes.
resources and kind of being forced, right? But are there other characteristics you see that are pretty common amongst this group?
Yeah, it's because we had talked about it briefly over email, and I had thought about it, and I think it comes down to one really basic idea is that there's a particular impact they want to make on the world
Mhm.
in service. And I think that last part is really the caveat. It's not I want to, have a college hall named after me, or I want to be known throughout time as blah blah blah. It's like, no, this is something that on the extreme side, this is something that needs to be fixed in the world.
Mhm.
In the less extreme side, this is something that can make the world better. And I'm that's where kind of the hubris comes in because we all have that, and it's like I'm the person to do it. And so I recently in my Inc column, you can go to inkdamonbrown.com to check out my column. I've had the regular column for a few years now. And I did a recent column about Kobe Bryant, and it's this thing of saying having the hubris, but also the humility, like the hubris to say, I am the best in the world. No one else will do that. When myself and my two co-founders made Cuddler, it's like no one else was doing that. But we saw the vision and it's like, nope, this needs to happen. No one else is doing it. We're going to make this happen. But then also have the humility to do the work, to
Mhm.
be in the gym 5 hours a day, even though you might be the best basketball player in the world, to be showing up for your customers, even though we had 250,000 customers. One of the things we did with Cuddler, and this was my own personal initiative, is to reply to each and every customer when they reached us. And so that ended up opening up a whole different thing, a lot of stress, really intense. But there were stories and there was instant feedback that I was getting. And then I was able to talk to the other two guys and be like, okay, this is what the customers need. And so when we did the next iteration, we were able to serve them more, which is ironically how we got to the 250,000. But we had to be humble enough to say, we don't know what's best. So you end up having to have the hubris to say, I'm going to change the world, but also the humility to say, I'm going to work my behind off to do so. And I think that's where the entrepreneurial spirit comes from. Because if you just have one of those, I want to change the world, well, then that's ego driven,
Mhm.
And if you say, I'm not sure if I can do it, or I'm the person for it, then you're not going to get off your behind. So it needs to be this careful tension between the two. And the people that I work with and the work that I do all is kind of geared towards helping people strike that balance. Because with people I coach, they're kind of, they could be on one or one end of the spectrum. And it's really about being in the center and being, having hubris and also being humble about it too.
So you talked about the you talked about how your work is rooted in the three bring your worth tenants. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about those?
Sure. So it comes down to three basic ideas. Literally, like if you look at the back of the book cover, that's it. It's just the three ideas, and so it's very much the energy that I'm trying to bring to the world. The first tenet is that everything is a partnership. So you could be a janitor at Google, or you could be CEO of LinkedIn, who's just stepping down as we speak.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter, you know. Jeff Weiner, who's stepping down as CEO of LinkedIn, is in partnership with all the people that he works with. The janitor at Google is in partnership with everyone else. Because if Google didn't need that janitor, they wouldn't have hired him or her. And so the amount of money that's available, how you're compensated or paid, that's almost secondary. If someone's having you involved in their life or their business in some form, it's a partnership. You can be the president, you can be a CEO, you could be the bus driver. It doesn't matter. So number one, knowing your value as far as partnerships. Number two is not waiting for permission. And so we end up having this culture, particularly with the creatives that I work with, and I consider most entrepreneurs to be creatives. They're waiting on, my background is writing, so they're waiting on the New Yorker, the kind of the prestigious magazine, to call them and say, hey, here's 6 figures. We want you to do a feature for the next article, for the next issue, and you can write about whatever you want. Like, I've been a journalist for years. That's never happened to me. I've talked with New York.
That call too. I'll let you know.
Yeah, I think all
there
of us.
You go. Yeah, all of us have waited for that call. We're waiting for Oprah to pick our book as the book club thing. You know, we're waiting for a Random House or whomever. And I'm talking about writing, but that applies to anything else. The proverbial call from Johnny Carson to say, be on the Tonight Show, and then suddenly you're going to have a comedic career. Seth Godin and other amazing people that I look up to and respect have talked about this quite a bit. But the age of the gatekeepers is kind of gone. And so the last 6 books I've published have actually been self-published. I've done 24 books. So I was doing 18, and then I said, you know what? I know my audience better than the publishers, because now the publishers, I'm doing a traditional publishing contract with them, and they're saying, okay, Damon, wonderful. Before we sign the contract for you and give you some advance money, how are you going to reach your audience? And I'm like, well, I know how to reach them, but how are you going to help me reach them? And they couldn't answer that. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just, I've been cultivating the tribe and the people I've been working with for pretty much decades at this point. So I know exactly how to reach them. So it's like, okay, well, I'll self-publish. My first self-published book a few years ago, that became a bestseller. That was The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, totally on my own. So it's not even special about me, but that's special about the environment. And that could not have happened 10 or 20 years ago. So understanding that, you know, don't wait for permission for that. Go forward and create what you're going to create. And number 3 is that everyone, including you, has a legacy. So that me as an independent, I know a lot of independents. I've been on the board of independent organizations. So I know how a lot of us think. And for many of us, we look at it as being a mercenary, where it's like, there's this thing we're going to do, and this will pay the bills this month, and oh, they'll pay me some money for that. Okay, cool. I'll do this over here, and I'll do this over here, and I'll just patch it together. And not taking a moment to step back and say, there's actually a lineage, as Steve Jobs says, looking back and connecting the dots. Like, a lot of us don't stop to do that. And so that requires pausing, that requires reflection, but also requires you understanding that it's not you taking random work, but there's actually a pattern here. In my many, many years as a freelance writer, I used to say that I was interested in this, and I was interested in this, and I was interested in this. Each year that went by, they started to coalesce until, just like, you know, we talked about at the very beginning, I can say, I'm interested in how technology connects people, how technology facilitates intimacy. Now, if I look back at my many years as a journalist and the books I've done and even the coaching that I do, I see the pattern. But when I was in it, I didn't see the pattern. So that took time, and it took self-reflection. And so those are the 3 major tenets: to understand that everything is a partnership, to understand that you should not wait for permission because no one's going to give it to you. And number 3 is that you and everyone has a legacy, and trying to embed that into the way we view things. And I think if you focus on those 3 tenets, then you'll be able to really bring your worth to the world and ideally like make some type of impact.
It's very profound.
I could see you noodling. So
I know. There's a lot of things I'm like, oh man, I gotta go. You know, but that was great. You know, I mean, that's great information. I think those are really things everyone needs to focus on.
Right, I agree. And when I first started my coaching a few years ago, it was, okay, I'm focused on independence and people, again, like myself. And then now the coaching I do with, again, more on the one-on-one front, It's people who are in the corporate arena,
Right.
or people who are CEOs of a company and so forth. So now even my own definition of that starting to expand, where it's not just limited to the discussion with creatives,
Mhm.
or independents like myself. It's like, no, this is something that can be a discussion, all the way to the boardroom. So yeah, I'm humbled that it resonates with you, and I'm on my own journey as far as figuring out who it resonates with too. So.
Yeah.
Do
No,
you find that some of those corporate players, they're really more creative than they come off? Are you are
Oh,
you
don't
able
get
to
me
kind of tap
started.
into that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's a really good observation, and I talk about that all the time. Um, Someone I know named Chase Jarvis. He's over on the West Coast. He has something called Creative Live. He's a co-founder, really prolific as far as things he discusses. But what he talks about is that creativity is a muscle. And so when we're young, and I have two young kids, so one's a toddler, the other one is in first grade. And so when you see young kids like that, they just make up stuff. You can give them like a cardboard box and they'll like, make a sandcastle, and it has like an army on top of it, and it has these units and all these details, and it just comes out of thin air. And at a certain point it stops. The assumption for years was that our brain actually starts changing in different ways. But I actually know people that study neuroscience. It's more like there's a natural atrophy because culturally we're told not to use that creative muscle as much.
Mhm.
And so there's people that are in my family, there's people that I care about, there's people, not so much that I coach, but the people that I coach, it's more about encouraging them where they believe they're not creative.
Mhm.
But that's actually not true. And creativity is not something that you're born with. It's just, or how can I put it? You're not born to being creative isn't a class.
Right.
It isn't like, okay, you're a creative and you are not.
Mhm.
Creative is actually how you view things and you looking at things in a different way. If we don't use those particular muscles, quite literally with our brain, because our brain is our biggest muscle, if we don't use that, then it's like not using your arm for 10 years. Of
Right.
course, it's not going to be able to lift up. And
Mhm.
so we have to find ways to cultivate that creativity, but that requires us losing the stigma and the separation between people who are creative and people who are not.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think sometimes too, a lot of big companies are afraid of creativity, right? Because it drives a lot of change. So
Sure, exactly. And so, yeah, so you have to kind of decide,
yeah,
with the bit of corporate research I've done, it's like you either are innovating or you're defending the status quo.
right. Yeah.
There's no in between in that. And so it's like, so if you're trying to innovate, if you want to use that word, and then you have people that are trying to defend the status quo, it's like, well, they're not on the same side of the street.
Yeah.
So the idea of creativity can challenge people. And again, with some of the folks that I've coached and some people I've talked to when I've had speaking engagements, I'm helping them bring innovation in through maybe the back door or in a way that's safe. One of the things that is important with innovation, is understanding what the current rules are and then breaking them.
Yes.
And that's something that as creatives, if you want to put that class on it, people that are considered creative, like it's hard to kind of observe those rules,
Mhm.
because you have to kind of figure out what the guidelines are and then go do that. Again, I'd done 18 books. I did a couple self-published books, but I did 18 books through traditional publishers. Two of them were self-published. Um, then understanding the ropes, helping other people get their books published, being an editor a little bit and all that. Then now me as a self-publisher, I broke all kinds of rules with Bring Your Worth, but I knew what rules I was breaking. So anyone listening, that's what I would encourage. If you're going to say, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to do this and be really creative, it's like, okay, but understand that creativity, if it breaks, you know what I mean? Then if it's not serving the customer, then
Yeah.
it's creative, but you have to figure out how you can do that and do it in a different fashion versus just doing it different because you can do it different.
Thank you so much, Damon, for joining us. You gave us
Absolutely.
a lot of good stuff today. Can you tell everybody where they can find you, find your books?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. The best way to find me is at joindamon.me. That's a weekly community newsletter conversation that happens. It's every Wednesday at 5:55 a.m. It goes straight to your mailbox, and it's just the discussions that are happening right now, stuff from my income, where I'll be on tour, the events that I'm doing, a lot of free stuff and cool stuff like that. So you can go to joindamon.me. It's completely free. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to damonbrown.net, and that's my portfolio. And I've done 3 TED Talks. My TED Talks are on there, my keynotes, all that stuff is available for you. And then my latest book is called Bring Your Worth, Level Up Your Creative Power, Value, and Service to the World. You can get it, actually, the best way to get it would be through joindamon.me or through damonbrown.net, but you can also get it through your online retailers. So I think that's the big stuff, but I really enjoyed talking with you guys.
Well, Damon, we
Thank you
appreciate
so
it
much, Damon. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.